initial flight test crew for Starliner, Wilmore and Williams were fully incorporated into the space station's Expedition 72 team and began research and other work aboard the station along with the other crew members. Additionally, Williams commanded the orbiting laboratory for much of the expedition.
And after a successful liftoff and separation from Falcon 9, Nick and Alexander made a short flight on board Dragon to the International Space Station in September. Both veterans of long-duration station missions, both Williams and Wilmore conducted spacewalks during their 9 months in space. Having had the capacity to leave the station at any point, had there been some type of emergency, the crew members began packing for their voyage home about a week ago and worked through tasks and shared lessons learned with the newly arrived Crew 10 team, who arrived just a few days ago.
For return operations such as this, NASA and SpaceX closely coordinate with the United States Coast Guard to establish a safety zone to ensure public safety and for the safety of those involved in the recovery operations, as well as the crew on board the returning spacecraft. Multiple notices are issued
by a U.S. astronaut. Former NASA astronaut Peggy Whitson ranks first for the U.S. with 675 days in space. She conducted 2 spacewalks and has completed 9 over the course of her career for a total of 62 hours and 6 minutes of spacewalking time. She ranks 4th on the list of cumulative time spacewalking by a female astronaut. And she has flown on 4 different spacecraft types, including the Space Shuttle, Soyuz, Starliner, and now Dragon. Previously, she served on Expedition 14 and 15 in 2006 and 2007, and again with Expedition 32 and 33 in 2012. She's a retired U.S. Navy captain and is a proud graduate of the U.S. Naval Academy.
NASA astronaut Butch Wilmore is also serving as a mission specialist today. This is his 3rd spaceflight and, just like Sunny, logged 286 days in space. He conducted 1 spacewalk and completed 5 over the course of his career, earning him a total spacewalking time of 21 hours, 2 minutes. He's flown on 4 different spacecraft types throughout his career: the Space Shuttle, Soyuz, Starliner, and now Dragon. Previously, the Mount Juliet, Tennessee native served on STS-129 in 2009 and Expedition 41 and 42 from 2014 to 2015. Wilmore is also retired, a retired captain in the U.S. Navy.
And Alexander Gorbunov is a 3rd mission specialist serving on today's mission. Crew 9 was his very first spaceflight to the space station, earning him a total of 171 days in space over the course of his career. Gorbunov, along with Nick Hague, saw the arrival of 4 visiting vehicles and saw the departure of 4 as well. The duo orbited the Earth more than 2,700 times during their mission. Before his cosmonaut selection in 2018, Gorbunov worked as an engineer for a rocket space corporation and helped support cargo spacecraft launches from the Baikonur Cosmodrome in Kazakhstan.
To prepare for upcoming events, Dragon is currently doing a couple of things autonomously. First, it's isolating the thermal control system fluid loops from the radiator. This system is what will help keep the internal temperature of Dragon very comfortable for Nick, Sunny, Butch, and Alexander during the re-entry phase. Dragon is also initiating separation of the claw mechanism, which will terminate data, power, and fluid connections between the spacecraft and the trunk in preparation for that trunk separation that I mentioned earlier. Now, as we saw before, we are hoping to get more views inside of the Dragon capsule. We will bring those, of course. We want to see more of our 4 crew members. But now a bit more of the Dragon Freedom capsule. It has flown on several missions for NASA. It first launched April 27th, 2022. To the International Space Station on NASA's SpaceX Crew 4 mission. It was subsequently used for 2 private spaceflight missions to the space station for Axiom Space, Axiom Mission 2 in May 2023, and Axiom Mission 3 in January of 2024. And of course, Crew 9 launched last year, is September 28th. So yeah, a little bit about the Dragon Freedom capsule. Here, a view that we have once again between the shoulders of Commander Nick Hague, who is on the left-hand side of your screen there, and Mission Specialist Alexander Gorbunov there on the right.
That's right, Kate. And the next major milestone that we're looking ahead towards this afternoon is claw separation. We're targeting that claw separation at 2:05 p.m. Pacific time this afternoon, so less than 10 minutes from now. Continuing to get some views inside Dragon Freedom. To the far left there is NASA astronaut Butch Wilmore, and as you can see, the crew is suited up in their space suits. They are suited up in what we call dynamic phases of flight. So when they launch, when they dock, when they undock, when they return back for splashdown. We might hear some call-outs on the loops about putting their visors down. That will happen just prior to deorbit burn. And you'll hear us pause when some of those communications happen. That's because we want to make sure that we are relaying the best information to you all, and so that you hear it as well. So if you do hear us pause, that is what we're doing. You also see they have their on there, and I know the gloves are pretty unique on the Dragon spacesuits, right? They're custom created?
Yes, the spacesuit overall is custom fit for each astronaut. These gloves enable usage of the touchscreen panels that they have in front of them. We can't see it from this view, but that view we saw earlier between Alexander Gorbanov and Nick Hague, that is a touchscreen. It allows the crew to monitor everything that Dragon is doing, along with those tablets that they have there on their legs. So yeah, the spacesuit itself is intended to act as a mini spaceship, if you will, as once the visors are closed, it is able to maintain a pressure in the unlikely event of a depressurization event for Dragon. So there we can see those screens I was talking about. So there in the center, we've got the location tracker, as well as on the left-hand side, it's mapping out the operations that Dragon is executing. The crew has to remain well informed of all these things that Dragon is doing autonomously. That basically means that Dragon is flying itself. The crew has the ability to gain control of the capsule if necessary, but the capsule is essentially going to bring itself home. But of course, in order to be familiar with
Freedom, SpaceX, deorbit sequence start in 5 minutes.
Freedom capsule.
And so we did hear that call out for the deorbit sequence start to begin here in 5 minutes. That call from the ground came from the core, or crew operations resource engineer here in Hawthorne, mission control just behind us. And that went up to Commander Nick Hague. He's going to be doing the majority of the communications during the flight downhill today through splashdown, and they'll be communicating with the core all along the way. Now, we did mention that they are flying on Crew Dragon Freedom. The naming of spacecraft has gone all the way back to the very beginning of this human spaceflight program. This is a nod to Alan Shepard naming his spacecraft Freedom 7 during the Mercury program. And so the crew that first flew up on Freedom a few years ago had the opportunity to name this Dragon, and they named it Freedom. That was Crew 4 that was the first flyers on this spacecraft. It's also flown for Axiom Mission 2 and 3, and then, of course, today for Crew 9 as well.
Yeah, actually, fun fact about this particular capsule, of those 4 missions that Sandra just mentioned, we have seen daytime splashdowns for 2 of those. Today will mark the third daytime splashdown. So there's something lucky about this particular capsule that gets daytime splashdowns. Nighttime is great because we can see even more clearly the capsule streaking through, but I personally love the daylight views because we really get even better views of the recovery team operations during that phase of the mission.
Yes, absolutely. And if you follow along with our missions, you'll know that sometimes weather is a watch item when it comes to undocking and splashdown. We do splashdown in the water, so we want to ensure that parameters like wave heights and wind speeds and precipitation, lightning, all of that is looking good for the crew and the safety of those recovery personnel. And today the weather is just pristine. We got off of space station on the very first attempt. So I'm joking around and saying that it was because it was St. Patrick's Day and we got really lucky with the weather.
I wouldn't disagree with that. Speaking of weather, we will be hearing from Core probably around 2:20-ish. Typically, before we enter the period of loss of signal or LOS, we will hear an entry briefing from the core, the Crew Operations Resource Engineer, and they will deliver important information like updated anticipated splashdown and loss of signal times to the crew, as well as the wave height and wind speed. So we'll be standing by to listen in on those. Like I said, that will happen shortly after, typically after trunk separation. I can't quite remember if it's before or after deorbit burn. It must be before. But in any case, we'll be hearing all of that coming from core. In fact, that individual is seated there in the room on your screen. That is SpaceX Mission Control in Hawthorne, California. That room is located just over our shoulders, and that is where Dragon operators are standing by on console, monitoring the progress of Dragon as it continues its way home. It's been, at the point of splashdown, it'll be about 17 hours since Dragon undocked from the International Space Station. The team there in mission control, there are multiple teams, in fact, and they cycle through shifts to ensure that everybody gets the required rest and sleep periods, just like the astronauts on board. And that Crew Operations and Resource Engineer is seated there in the room, and that, like Sandra said, is the primary voice that we'll be hearing communicate from the SpaceX team to the crew on board.
That's right. And so it looks like we're about 3 minutes or so from the claw separation portion of today's flight. The claw is a portion on the spacecraft that holds the trunk to Dragon. Following claw separation, we're going to jettison or remove that trunk because it's no longer needed. The trunk has solar arrays on it that provides power to the Dragon spacecraft. But now that we're beginning the reentry process, we need to go ahead and jettison that trunk and able to expose the heat shield, which is really going to do the heavy lifting as Crew 9 re-enters the Earth's atmosphere. They come in at 17,500 miles per hour, so they really need to ensure that that heat shield absorbs that heat, and there's...
The orbit sequence start.
And so we did just get communications there that the deorbit sequence start has begun. So here in just a couple minutes from now, we expect to hear information or a call back about the claw separation having begun. And again, that kicks off that trunk separation portion that I was discussing to remove that, expose the heat shield, and then eventually we'll have the deorbit burn, and we'll continue to walk you through all of these milestones as we approach them ahead of our splashdown at 2:57 p.m. Pacific time this afternoon off the coast of Tallahassee, Florida.
Yeah, we're very excited to bring the Crew 9 crew home. Sandra, we were talking about the trunk separation. That trunk is on a trajectory that will re-enter in the atmosphere and break up upon that re-entry. The heat shield itself is one of my favorite parts of the Dragon capsule. It is the workhorse of the re-entry phase. It will work to protect the Dragon capsule and the crew members on board during the re-entry phase as the temperatures outside of the capsule build up to, I believe, about 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit in excess of. And meanwhile, the interior of Dragon stays a very comfortable temperature. That heat shield does a lot of the work, and we'll see that plasma build up on the exterior of the capsule. As a result of the plasma that builds up, we will lose communications with the crew. This is known as loss of signal, or LOS. This is roughly a 10-minute period on average, even less than. I believe today it is probably about 6 or 7 minutes long. It kind of depends on the mission, and it happens for every Dragon capsule that re-enters the atmosphere. Due to that plasma buildup, we're not able to communicate or command the capsule, so we stand by while we wait to regain communication after we pass through that period of loss of signal and get what's known as AOS, or acquisition of signal.
So continuing to stand by for claw separation, and then we'll look towards trunk separation. It'll be just about a minute or so after that. That happens pretty rapidly in succession. Some of our milestones will take a little bit longer throughout the day. For example, we will have a deorbit burn after that will take about 7.5 minutes and helps get Dragon set up in the right trajectory to splash down in the Gulf off the coast of Florida. So continuing to stand by for claw separation.
Nominal trunk jettison.
All right.
Freedom copies.
Great news there. That trunk has been jettisoned from the Dragon capsule. So the claw was separated. That's the mechanism that connects the telemetry and power between the Dragon capsule and the trunk. In order to expose the heat shield underneath Dragon, we had to jettison that trunk, and so we just got confirmation that that has happened. So that is great news. Basically means that telemetry is looking good and that the nitrox system is primed for cabin and suit cooling, and the heat shield, like I said, is now exposed and ready for atmospheric re-entry. The trunk served its purpose by gathering energy from the sun through its solar cells and converting that to battery power. Since we separated the trunk, we can't generate any more new power, but we really don't need to since we're coming home and Dragon has enough battery power already stored. Now up next, the final steps that Dragon will perform prior to re-entry: the slew or the maneuver to deorbit burn attitude, and then the deorbit burn itself. This deorbit burn is the last time that the forward Dracos, which are the 4 thrusters located on top of the spacecraft under the nose cone, it's the last time that they will ignite. The deorbit burn will place Dragon on a precise trajectory to return to the splashdown zone off the coast of Florida, off the coast of Tallahassee, Florida, and that will last about 7.5 minutes once it starts.
And so deorbit burn is targeted for 2:11 p.m. Central Time, so about 2 minutes from now. As we mentioned, it's going to last about 7.5 minutes, again, helping to get Dragon into the precise trajectory to ensure that splashdown occurs in the area that was calculated and where the recovery team is already in place, ready to support splashdown operations today. The recovery vessel Megan is the ship that is going to be utilized today, and we also have what is called fast boats that go out first to check the spacecraft and make sure everything is looking good before the recovery vessel Megan approaches. So that whole recovery process takes about an hour, I would say, from the time the crew splashes down to the time they're on the boat and the crew gets out of the capsule, and we'll continue to bring you live coverage through every step of the way today as Crew 9 returns home.
Indeed. Now, let's take a little bit of a closer look at Dragon. One of the great things about being close to the space station is that we can use space station cameras to look at Dragon, but now that Dragon is on its way home, we don't have those external cameras. So here's an animation of what the capsule looks like. We've got the pressurized section, the capsule on the top, and the trunk or the unpressurized section on the bottom. That's where those solar panels that we manufacture in-house are located, soaking up the energy from the sun and turning it into power for the capsule. At the very top of the capsule is the nose cone. That is where the Dracos, the forward Dracos, are located. That nose cone is currently open, not closed like we saw in that animation. Once we get through the final maneuverings for the re-entry phase, we will close the nose cone capsule just before Dragon begins its atmospheric entry to protect that forward hatch there located along with those forward Dracos. So go ahead.
That's right. I was going to mention that the nose cone does open shortly after launch, and it remains open the entire time that Dragon is docked to the International Space Station. So as an example for this particular spacecraft, Freedom, since September when it docked to the International Space Station, remains open that entire time, and here shortly it will close for the very first time since September.
So quick recap of what Dragon has done in recent history here. We basically began preparations for re-entry known as the deorbit sequence. So Dragon released the trunk. As we said before, we separated the claw, we released the trunk. It next will slew to the deorbit burn attitude. Slew basically meaning maneuver, so it will position itself correctly to execute that deorbit burn. We want the heat shield side to be facing forward, or first, if you will. We want that to be the leading edge of the Dragon capsule, as that heat shield is meant to basically be an ablative material for the heat that it will incur. Once we complete that deorbit burn attitude slew, we will initiate the deorbit burn itself. That will last for several minutes, expecting that to be to start here any moment now, actually, and then it will go until about 2:18 p.m. Pacific time or 5:18 p.m. Eastern time.
And I did hear confirmation that deorbit burn is underway. As we mentioned, it's about a 7.5 minute burn. So within the last 10 minutes, Dragon has jettisoned its trunk and initiated the deorbit burn just seconds ago. As mentioned earlier, for those operations, NASA and SpaceX closely coordinate with the United States Coast Guard to establish a safety zone to ensure public safety and for the safety of those involved in the recovery operations, as well as the crew on board the returning spacecraft. Multiple notices are issued to the mariners in advance of and during recovery operations, and Coast Guard patrol boats are deployed to discourage boaters from entering the splashdown zones. So we do want to stress to the public the need to respect this safety zone. Recovering a spacecraft from the water is a hazardous operation, and any other boats interfering increases the risk to not only the astronauts in Dragon, but the teams working to recover them from the water and the safety of those that may come too close. So for the safety of the crew, which you see there on your screen, your safety, we recommend you sit back and watch as we'll continue to bring you the best possible views of our astronauts' homecoming.
Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, this deorbit burn is the last time that we will utilize our 4 forward Draco thrusters. Forward basically meaning at the top of the Dragon capsule. Dragon Freedom has not yet entered the Earth's atmosphere. This deorbit burn is what will line the vehicle up and put it on its final trajectory to the landing site right off the coast of Tallahassee, Florida. So basically, it is the last burn that the Dragon spacecraft executes and is what really locks it in for that precise landing. As you can see on your screen right now, Nick, Sunny, Butch, and Alexander are using their screens to keep tabs on the burn duration, the Draco firings, and trajectory details such as entry angle, spacecraft perigee, and how much distance remains until deorbit burn termination. As I mentioned earlier, Dragon is flying itself. So all the crew has to do is stay strapped into their seats and keep tabs on things. Although I must say, if I had one of those window seats, it would be pretty difficult to restrain myself. Now, with Nick, Sunny, Butch, and Alexander ready to deorbit and splash down back on Earth, they will be heading to one of 8 targeted sites supported by SpaceX and NASA. All of these sites are located off the coast of Florida, either in the Gulf of America or the Atlantic Ocean. Spreading the supported sites across multiple locations helps maximize the return opportunities for this mission and future crews, lowering the chance that we'll have to wave off due to bad weather. For those of you following along, you'll know that today's splashdown marks our final Dragon recovery on the East Coast. After 6 great years of successful recovery operations off the East Coast, we'll be moving all Dragon recovery operations back to the West Coast.
And as always, NASA and SpaceX jointly select our splashdown location. And for today, the prime recovery site is off the coast of Tallahassee, Florida. The selection process works with a lot of different variables, including the space station's orbital trajectory or path that it follows, what landing sites are available and have favorable weather, how much free flight capability Dragon has for the trip home, and the sleep schedules for the returning crew members, as well as, of course, the big one, the weather.
We'll start with calculating daily return options based off of the space station's current orbit and Dragon's capabilities to maneuver and line up for re-entry. The time from undock to landing at the primary site can vary from less than 6 hours to more than 39. Getting home the quickest comes with some obvious benefits, but we always have to make sure the crew is properly rested for dynamic operations, preventing us from scheduling 20-plus hour days for them, of course. Trajectory and ballistic experts provide the daily opportunities that would line up Dragon with the 7 landing zones and split them into what we call ascending and descending opportunities.
Dragon uses its Draco thrusters after leaving station to execute a series of altitude-lowering maneuvers and to line up with the selected primary site. It can also change to different alternative sites while in a free flight if sudden weather moves in that we may need to avoid. So, as we mentioned, weather is something we're constantly looking at, making the final call to proceed about 2.5 hours before the crew undocks. So, for the Crew 9 return, we looked at a number of weather items. Some of the obvious ones are no rain or a chance of lightning in the recovery zone, both for the safety of the crew inside Dragon and the recovery teams in the water. And we're also looking for wind speeds to be less than 15 feet per second or about 10 miles per hour, and relatively calm seas so that we can safely execute recovery operations, which includes landing a helicopter on the recovery ship to fly Nick, Sunny, Butch, and Alexander back to Florida. Once Dragon began flying today, we had a number of additional checkpoints to either proceed towards the primary site, head to the alternate, or select a new zone based on real-time weather data. These checks happened all the way up until we were in the final hours before the deorbit burn, which has just about a minute or so left in it. And this is the last burn in the trip home that commits Dragon to re-entering the Earth's atmosphere.
Now, we are currently waiting to conclude the deorbit burn. We've got less than a minute until that finishes. We will expect to hear a call out for nominal burn, which will confirm completion of that deorbit burn for Dragon Freedom. We can see images there from the touchscreen display panels that the crew utilizes in flight. We can see the visualization of exactly which one of the 4 forward Draco thrusters are firing. That's why you have kind of like a strobe effect there.
And if you're just joining us, you are looking at live views of the Dragon Freedom. On your left is Commander of Crew 9, Nick Hague. To his right is Roscosmos cosmonaut Alexander Grabenkin. And also in Gorbanov, that is Alexander Gorbanov. And then also in the capsule today is NASA astronauts Sunita Williams and Butch Wilmore. We are awaiting confirmation that their deorbit burn is complete, which is the last burn that's going to help set them up on a trajectory to splash down off the coast of Florida.
Deorbit burn complete. Performance nominal. Nose cone closure initiated.
Freedom copies.
All right, excellent news there. We heard the words we were looking for, nominal burn. So that means that deorbit burn was successful and nominal, meaning as expected. And we're now beginning to close the nose cone in preparation for atmospheric reentry.
So in the background, Dragon is currently inhibiting those forward bulkhead Draco thrusters that we just used to complete the deorbit burn, ensuring it's safe to latch the nose cone shut for re-entry. Also, the vehicle has initiated the nitrox suit purge, which will help keep Nick, Sunny, Butch, and Alexander cool and comfortable during re-entry, which is coming up in about 20 minutes from now. At this point, the nose cone is closing and protecting the forward hatch for re-entry, and the crew are using their screens to continue to monitor the locking of the nose cone, which is done by a set of hooks. And as we mentioned earlier, that nose cone has remained open since September, so this is the first time it's closing in a few months.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Now, we will be expecting, as I mentioned before, an entry brief from SpaceX Core. Again, that's the crew operations resource engineer who is seated in that room that you see there on your screen. That entry brief will provide updated times for anticipated splashdown as well as the loss of signal or a period of LOS. And that briefing will also give us information such as wind speed and wave height at the expected splashdown location. But all in all, everything has been great today. All events have been executed on time as expected, and we are looking forward to a splashdown of the Crew 9 crew at about 5:57 p.m. Eastern Time or 2:57 p.m. Pacific Time. Between now and then, things are going to start moving quite quickly. In fact, if anything, this will have seemed like the slower part of the reentry phase. We're going to go through, like I said, that period of loss of signal or LOS. That period is a few minutes long where we are unable to communicate or command the capsule due to the plasma that builds up on the exterior of the capsule. That period, like I said, lasts for a couple minutes. You will start to hear SpaceX Core hail the Crew 9 crew a little bit earlier than expected because we, in the past, have actually regained communications a couple minutes earlier than initially anticipated. So we'll go through that period of loss of signal, that entry period, that specifically when the when the Dragon spacecraft is re-entering through the atmosphere, approximately at about 18,000 feet when the capsule is traveling at 350 miles per hour. We will see our first views of parachutes for the day. It's one of my favorite moments of return sequences is when we get to see the drogue parachutes. We'll see the drogues come out. Those drogues will help slow the vehicle down to about 119 miles per hour. And then that is when the main parachutes will come out from the Dragon spacecraft and then ultimately end in splashdown.
And we are hearing confirmation that the nose cone is closed and everything was nominal or as expected with that closure. So as we begin the second half of entry, Dragon is now beginning to inject cooled nitrox into the air being delivered to the spacesuits worn by Nick, Sunny, Butch, and Alexander. Again, this is what will allow the crew to remain comfortable while external temperatures reach 3,500 degrees Fahrenheit as they re-enter the Earth's atmosphere. So the heat shield is pointing forward, leading Dragon to the landing site.
Yeah. Now, speaking of the heat shield, Dragon's primary heat shield is comprised of PICA 3.0, which stands for Phenolic Impregnated Carbon Ablator. The first-gen PICA was initially developed by NASA for studying and sampling comets within our solar system.
SpaceX partnered with NASA to develop PICA-X, which was the second-generation product used on all Dragon 1 cargo resupply service missions that resupplied the International Space Station on 20 missions. PICA 3.0 was developed specifically for use on Dragon 2 crew and cargo with enhanced structural and thermal capabilities that allowed the heat shield to be even more effective in the way that it utilized the ability to make that heat ablivate as it goes through the Earth's atmosphere.
The remainder of Dragon is composed primarily of a SpaceX proprietary ablative material. It's another class of thermal protection which is lighter weight versus PICA and protects the underlying composite structure during re-entry to ensure the structural capabilities are maintained.
While Dragon will experience temperatures well over 3,000 degrees during peak re-entry conditions, the characteristics of the thermal protection system coupled with the environmental control and life support system in the pressurized interior will ensure that Nick, Sunny, Butch, and Alexander stay cool and comfortable during all phases of re-entry through splashdown.
Now, if you've just recently joined us, we hope to regain views of our crew members inside Dragon Freedom, but we don't have those available at the moment due to ground station coverage. So we will bring those back to you as soon as we can. Now, after Dragon Freedom has re-entered the Earth's atmosphere, a series of parachutes will deploy to slow the crew's descent. First will be the 2 drogue parachutes, followed by the 4 main parachutes, and those will guide Dragon to its first contact with Earth since it launched back in September. Dragon will automatically deploy these parachutes when different pressure and positioning sensors on the spacecraft detect that they're at the right speed and altitude.
Vehicle velocity at drogue deploy is approximately 350 miles per hour, and they deploy at about 18,000 feet. Now, when the vehicle velocity at main deploy is approximately 119 miles per hour, and they deploy at about 6,500 feet. When Dragon splashes down in the water, the vehicle velocity will be about 16 miles per hour, so you can really see how those parachutes help to slow down the crew inside the capsule. The highest G-load the crew is expected to experience today is about 3 to 5 Gs.
Yeah, when you think about really fun roller coasters, they're about in that range. So I'm sure that our crew on board will be well equipped to experience those Gs. It's nothing for them. They go through much more intense training.
And so we are continuing to make our way through a number of milestones today. We did have trunk separation.
Freedom, SpaceX. Nose cone is secure for entry.
Freedom copies.
All right, great news there. That tells us that the final physical configuration change for Dragon is complete. We have closed that nose cone. This is the last physical change that Dragon undergoes prior to re-entering the Earth's atmosphere. It's important that that nose cone is completely closed because underneath it is not only where the 4 forward Draco thrusters are located, but it's also because that is where the forward hatch is located. That is the hatch that is utilized for the crew to ingress and egress from the station while it is docked on board. And since our capsules are flight proven and we reuse them on future space flights, we want to make sure that all of the integrity of that hardware remains intact. So that nose cone is successfully closed, and we're going to start moving pretty quickly here. As I mentioned before, we'll go through loss of signal. We'll get that signal back several minutes later, and then we'll see the parachute action.
Yep, and then that's all ahead of splashdown off the coast of Florida. We're targeting Tallahassee as our splashdown zone today at 2:57 p.m. Pacific time this afternoon. Now, you did mention the call to the crew. They'll do some additional calculations following that burn and potentially let us know if that splashdown time has changed at all. But right now, we are continuing to target 2:57 p.m. And you can see there on your screen a path of where Dragon will be re-entering today. So if you are in the southern tip of Mexico, you might have the opportunity to see Dragon. Because it's a daytime splashdown, you probably won't have too great of views, but potentially you'll have the opportunity to get a glimpse of it there.
Once again, Dragon operators, they're monitoring the progress of Dragon through this re-entry phase. That is SpaceX Mission Control, located here in Hawthorne, California. That is also where the crew operations and resource engineer is seated. That person is the voice that we have heard multiple times and will continue to hear as the primary point of contact to the crew on board Dragon Freedom. We will also hear the voice of Commander Nick Hague. Basically, after we hear the core communicate something, we will hear Nick Hague indicate that they copy, that they heard the message well, some sort of recognition that the message was received.
And if you joined us yesterday for our coverage during the undocking, we were communicating through something that's called a big loop. We do that when we're in integrated operations with the International
Freedom, SpaceX for entry sequence. Report when ready to copy.
Ready to copy.
All right, I've got some updated times for you. Our COM blackout start time is 2144. Our COM blackout end time is 2151. And our splashdown time is the same per your displays, 2157.
Okay. Understand COM blackout start 2144, stop 2151, splashdown per display.
That's a good read back. And with that, please report when tablets are secured behind the elastic bands, restraints are tight, and visors are down.
And copy, welcome.
And with that communication from the Corps or Crew Operations Resource Engineer here in Hawthorne to Commander Nick Hague of Crew Dragon Freedom, we did hear that the loss of signal period is still at 2:44 p.m. Pacific, but we had a 1-minute adjustment to the acquisition of signal. That's going to now be at 2:51 p.m. Pacific time. However, our splashdown time remains the same at 2:57 p.m. Pacific time this afternoon off the coast of Tallahassee, Florida.
So all good news there as Dragon continues to make its way home with the Crew 9 crew. As we've mentioned before, we are splashing down on the Gulf Coast. We have ability to splash down on either side of Florida, but the location site just outside of Tallahassee, Florida is the site that was selected today due to best recovery conditions. And as Sandra mentioned before, weather is always a watch item, but everything is looking great for that particular recovery location. So I'm sure once we start getting views from the recovery vessel, I have a feeling it's going to be a pretty beautiful afternoon.
And we did mention that, of course, this is a daylight splashdown, so we should be getting some great views. We do have a couple of spacecraft called the WB-57, which are high-altitude planes that NASA utilizes during splashdown operations. Those are en route and going to be tracking the capsule as it makes its way through the atmosphere and should be providing some good views for us. Kate and I were just chatting about how we haven't had a daytime splashdown in a little while, so we're looking forward to the views along with you.
Yeah. Nighttime views are also great because we can see that capsule streaking through the night sky quite brightly. So like Sandra, you said earlier, daylight will be a little bit less bright, but we will definitely be able to see the SpaceX recovery team operations much clearer. I could also imagine it's probably a little bit easier for the team themselves to do their work in daytime than at nighttime. We'll see them rush in really quickly with a couple of fast boats as they begin the initial safety checks and sweeps of the Dragon capsule while also retrieving the parachutes from the surface of the ocean. The recovery vessel, the main recovery vessel, will continue to make its way closer to the Dragon capsule. It is stationed a couple miles away from the actual recovery location, the splashdown location, for obvious safety purposes. So it takes a little while for that vessel to make its way over, but once it's closer, we'll have even better views of those recovery operations.
And you may be wondering why sometimes we splash down in the daytime versus the nighttime. And believe me, we would all love for these operations to happen during regular daytime working hours, but unfortunately, orbital mechanics just doesn't quite work out that way. So it has to deal with the location of the International Space Station, as well as where the splashdown zone is on Earth and that trajectory, as well as the phasing. So as we mentioned earlier, sometimes we have phasing as short as 6 hours, sometimes in excess of 30 plus hours. It just depends on where the targeted area is that the capsule is going to splash down. So today's phasing has been 17 hours since undocking occurred at 10:05 p.m. Pacific yesterday evening for us here in Hawthorne. Early wee hours for folks on the East Coast and other areas of the United States.
Yeah, but regardless of whether it's daytime or nighttime, the SpaceX recovery team has trained and practiced and rehearsed for it all. So regardless of daylight, They are really efficient with those operations, and but like you said, Sandra, it has been a minute since we have seen a daytime splashdown on a NASA SpaceX crew mission. The last daytime recovery was on Crew 4, which was the debut flight for the capsule flying today, the spacecraft known as Dragon Freedom. And so, yeah, kind of a fun fact there in terms of the timing of that daylight splashdowns. Once again, standing by for more communication with the crew. The next event that we have